that dark time really brought us into contact with a much clearer reality of what was important for us. And we got to live that in a very real, primal, prominent way. I swear we talk about that maybe every day, at least a couple times a week, right? Like I miss that. I miss that living situation. It's not the sustain, like we're not there now, right? We're not living there now. But, and then we also really started to get, smarter with our finances, smarter with our planning, smarter with our intentional ways of, that's not my strong suit. My strong suit is to lead a bunch of people into the wilderness and have like a wild fucking, emergent spiritual experience, right? I spent most of my 20s out in the wilderness. I do not do well with like bureaucratic details and like the things that you need to do to be a citizen. So, my fatherhood experience has been like a continual expression of like, come on, dude, you got to do that too.
All right, fellas, today I'm talking with Dan Doty. Super excited for this conversation. And I'm sure, as always, we're going to, get into all different types of topics. But some of the things that caught my eye when I was learning about Dan, things like somatic meditation, very relevant to my current world. I want to get into that. Hunting big game, something I'm really excited about. I got into hunting a little while ago, thanks to a couple of my friends in Austin. Ended up harvesting a bison with Tucker Max and Hal Elrod, and it was really, really cool. And I want to talk about how that experience was for our kids. And Dan is the guy to talk to about this. And ultimately what all this teaches us about ourselves and raising kids. Dan is a married father of 3, and he lives with his family in Maine. When he's not at home, he might be around the world leading wilderness expeditions, in real cool places like Yellowstone or Glacier Park. Dan is the founder of Fatherhood Unlocked. Obviously, I want to talk about that. He's got a podcast, courses, live events. I'll be on his show coming up here soon. And he's, as I mentioned before about somatic meditation, he's a teacher in that space. And I'm very excited to learn about this, because when you think about big game hunting and somatic meditation, they feel like they're on opposite ends of a spectrum. One feels very soft and internal and like connected to your emotions, and the other one is this like primal hunting gathering. And I want to talk about the blend of those. One of the things that you may know about Dan, if you don't, he's produced over 50 episodes of a hit show called MeatEater. He's been on Joe Rogan. He traveled all over, blew up this brand called Everyman. And now, like I said, is in a lot of spaces, executive coaching, and also has a program called Rite of Passage, where it's men's work meets big game hunting. There's so much that we can talk about here. Dan, I'm just honored to have you, and thanks for making time for the conversation today.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to be here. You are fantastic at intros. That was fucking wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. It's always easier to do that when you're genuinely excited about your guest, which I am thrilled to be talking to you, man. I wish you could actually have heard the conversation with my assistant, Tanya, when was like learning about you. I'm like, fuck yes to this guy, like 100%. Like this is my dude right here. Dan, something that I learned about you is that, 4 years ago or so, it was a little rough. There was some things going on. There was some positive stuff that was happening, but there was a lot that was, on the darker side too. And it reminded me when I was hearing about this that, years ago for me, when I was leaving a corporate job as an executive where I had a cushy salary and things were pretty dialed in, and I decided, I was like, oh, I'm going to go be a writer and a speaker, and I'm going to do this charity thing, and I'm going to have some kids and get married, and I did it all in the period of a year. Dude, I have a picture of me sitting on a couch holding my son. I look like death was knocking on the door. Like I was beat down. I'm sneaking shots of vodka in between work, appointments, just to manage. I'm falling apart, but trying to hold it together. And dude, I mean, bank account ran dry, $100,000 in credit card debt. Like this was a dark period of my life. I totally crapped the bed at Christmas time, dude. I didn't buy Christmas presents for I was literally just struck. They were foreclosing on our home. I had another home that our renters were squatting in our home, and they decided not to pay us. Like it just went on and on and on. And dude, I really connected with you when you started to tell me the story about what was happening with you 4 years ago. So if you could take us directly to the deep end of your life and talk to us about the real shit, and then we'll get into some other stuff that may be a little lighter. But Yeah, man, let's get to the real thing too. Where was life difficult a couple years ago?
Yeah, happy to start there, man. And so just a very brief preface to that is, my career before I had kids, before I, started a family was in media for a while, right? I was the producer and director of that show, MeatEater. And it was cushy and it was exciting and it was wonderful. And I had this really loud, annoying call in my ear and my head and my body that was like, dude, there's this other thing you have to do, right? And so when my first kid was born, I got fired from my cushy, awesome, media job a month later. And it was just it needed to happen. And it was just sort of like a push out the door, right? And so that was the time that I launched a company called Every Man, which is a men's work organization. And it had this really fast, efficient rise. Like it really did catch a wave right away. But organizationally, it didn't work very well. I think we had a lot of cooks in the kitchen. We didn't put things in place. And so I struggled financially substantially through that whole thing. So that's all setting this up, right? So my second son, is on the way. We moved to California, moved from Montana to California. And, I was living off of literally mainlining hope and energy and people's cheers. And, we're doing this thing out in the world and, I'm being sent to the Today Show. I'm being featured. We are being featured in the, New York Times Men's Health, you name it, all of the we just caught fire in the media for a while. And my son was being born. And we had no fucking money. And it literally was in the course of 10 days, I believe, that my son was born. I was on the Today Show. My bank account went completely dry, couldn't pay rent. And it was just this moment of a contraction that was incredibly painful. And that wasn't the only, that pain continued. The next, I would say 4 to 6 to 8 months were very dark, probably some of the darkest moments between my wife and I. And I think the deepest part that I want to share but don't want to share, right, is that I had to reckon, or was finally maybe able to reckon with what my responsibility meant as a dad, right? So I started that company at the same time my son was born, literally. And it was so many irresponsible decisions. So just overwhelmingly, to the point now that I look back, I'm like, what the fuck were you thinking, man? Right. And it was understandable because, we had major traction. We had people, we were selling out retreats. We were on it was working. We just weren't making cash from it. And so it was a really confusing time. It was really kind of like a push pull, literally everybody cheering me on, and I'm basically failing my young family at some very simple core levels. And one moment pulled out of there was it's interesting. I've had a few moments in my life where I literally complete panic moment. One was I had Lyme disease. It was turning into meningitis. It was in my brain. I was in a taxi in fucking Brooklyn after I had gone to a chiropractor to try to crack my locked neck and was screaming. Anyway, so that was one moment where and it's interesting what's happened to me in these moments of panic. I call basically the most stable adult man I know, right? So in that time, it was a host of the show that I was running, and in this time when my son was born, it was a mentor and a friend who basically helped prop me up into some work shortly thereafter. But anyway, that moment I wanted to highlight, which is shit has completely hit the fan. I have nothing to hold on to. I don't know what to do. I don't know what's up and what's down in those moments, It's interesting who I called, which was just a very stable, strong, responsible, older man in my life. That's where I went. So, wow, it's a little snapshot.
What did that conversation look or feel like when you called? What did that person provide to you? What was the result?
Yeah, well, I think you'd be happy to share. His name's Foster Mobley, and he's a well-established, founded a very successful executive coaching firm. And if I remembered, I walked out the back step of our house in North San Diego, and I was completely broken open. Right, I was sobbing. I was panicked, and I think I probably just laid it up. I'm like, man, I am don't know what to do. I am lost. I didn't know who to call. I saw your name and I just called you. And he's a very loving, mature, strong, kind guy, and he just listened, right? He just dropped, I don't know what he was doing, but he dropped whatever it was, and made space and talked me through and offered both emotional but practical support, like right off the bat, just like an immediate, like, what, I'm here, what can I do? Like I got you. And it wasn't just it was like he caught me,
Dude, isn't it I think it's fascinating that what I'm hearing is that the real value was he just held space for you. It's not like you go, oh, John, yeah, here were the 5 steps that he gave. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Although he might have given a practical action that you then were able to take and put in. But as you sit here today, it sounds like the highest value was that him being a solid, human, a grounded man, a person you respected, who just held space for you and answered the phone and was there for you. Am I hearing that correctly? Was the highest value?
Well, it was certainly the highest immediate value, 100%. Yeah. And it's interesting. I hadn't thought about this before, but as you're reflecting that back, I wasn't thinking, there wasn't much conscious thinking going on in my head at that time. It was pretty primal. But I realize now that, he was a father. He was a successful father that raised a bunch of kids. And, honestly, in sort of archetypal moments, like I needed dad energy, man. I needed that sort of stable someone to go to, right? I don't think I could have made that call. There's a lot of people in my life could have held space for me. Let me say that. And there was something unique about, how I regard him or what that situation was, that it's been a really interesting thing to ask that question. Like, if shit hits the fan, who do you call? And I can think that through, but that's what I'm kind of highlighting here, is that when it was happening and there was no premeditation, he was the dude I went to.
So what really pulled you through the dark time? Come out the other side. Not that everything's perfect now. I'm not presupposing that. But what really did change? What actions did you take? What beliefs shifted in you?
Yeah, really, it was a wake-up call and me getting the medicine of like, listen, man, like, you gotta, it really was, as harsh as that feedback was, as sort of intense as this moment was, it was exactly what I needed to receive, right? And so what happened is my wife and I, over time, I think we had a couple really hard months, but then something started to shift. Like, we would sit down and, kind of, it's like we were living in this intense sort of space of possibility. And then I think all that got cleared off and we're like, okay, we have to try to orient ourselves to the practical real life here. And so what actually happened is we ended up moving into an RV on our friend's regenerative farm, spent $500 a month, and had literally like the best next 2 years of our lives together. We just got rid of all of our shit. We put it all in storage. We went all away, and we lived outside in this canyon in Southern California. And, I could make up stories that it saved our marriage, and maybe that's true, maybe that's not, but that dark time really brought us into contact with a much clearer reality of what was important for us. And we got to live that in a very real, primal, prominent way. And, man, it was, I swear we talk about that maybe every day, at least a couple times a week, right? Like I miss that living situation. It's not the like, we're not there now, right? We're not living there now, but, and then we also really started to get, I'll just say smarter, smarter with our finances, smarter with our planning, smarter with our intentional ways of. That's not my strong suit. My strong suit is to lead a bunch of people into the wilderness and have like a wild fucking, emergent spiritual experience, right? I spent most of my 20s out in the wilderness. I do not do well with like bureaucratic details and like the things that you need to do to be a citizen. So, my fatherhood experience has been like a continual expression of like, come on, dude, you got to do that too, so.
Would you say that one of the big takeaways is just when I hear your story of transformation, and I hear you move from that dark time to the happiest time, perhaps, or a happy time, simplification, is that a big part of the equation?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard. And I think it's hard to sustain simplification, a simple life. But yeah, that was it. And the location didn't hurt. We were on a regenerative farm with literally every beautiful food you could ever, want. You just pick it for dinner, and it was really pretty special in a lot of ways.
The contrast of this story is so wild, though, because like you're on TV, you're blowing up, you're like you're in all the media outlets, you're just blowing up, and that in a sense is some of your darkest times. And then when you sell it all, you move into a regenerative farm, right? And that's some of your happiest time. Dude, I love that. I actually, there's beauty in that contrast. I'm really appreciative of that. When you think about your growth as a businessman and getting smarter and learning about finances or whatever it is that you were learning over the years, how would you have done that differently? How would you have done Everyman differently from a business perspective if you did articulate a framework? Would it have been, hire the right CEO? Would it have been better processes and systems? Or have you?
Yeah, it's 100% simple answer. And so Everyman still exists. I left it 2 years ago. And so I'll speak, in full respect here. But really what happened was that we had we had 4 co-founders that got brought in total. And it was basically a tech model that was being run. We were going to build this thing, get VC funding or get like large amounts of funding, then really blow it up. Because we had initial traction that, made people think that was realistic. If I would wind back time, we would simply have cash flowed the entire thing, and we would have just set it up as a stable, slower burn. And I know it would have worked. I absolutely know. And so when I left and I started my own shop, it's just been a much humbler but far more effective and at least for me in this instance, a far more appropriate and winning formula.
It's a good lesson.
Yeah.
Contrast has been a bit of a theme, I think, so far. And so on the note of contrast, I want to turn to the what do I want to call this? Like if the pendulum swings from one side to the other, I mentioned earlier, like the primal element of hunting and being in nature. And then this like somatic meditation that you became interested in. Let's just pick somatic meditation on one side of this coin and just go into that for a minute. First of all, just set the groundwork. What is somatic meditation and how did you find it?
Yeah, somatic meditation is an approach to contemplative practice or meditation that uses the experience of the body as your primary point of awareness, right? So you're not thinking about your body. You're actually literally feeling the sensations of your body through various practices and protocols. And the beauty of this methodology is that when you are in your body and you have hooked your awareness into the experience of your body, you're just, as a matter of fact, not in your head. Right. And so so there's more subtlety to it. It's much more about, it's not just the body, right? It's the mind body. And there's this sort of understanding in neurology that the right brain is not just the right brain, but it brings in the information, the primal sort of visceral information that the body picks up. They have beautiful stats about this, right? Our processing center brings in maybe I think it's literally 13 out of a billion parts of information that we're available to. And so our body and our right brain, this whole system, allows us to tap into this really, really, different, I'll just say that simply, a different way of being than our normal sort of left brain conceptual way. But I do have a story that brings the wilderness and that together. And that's actually how I found it. So briefly, I was a wilderness therapy guide in my 20s for a handful of years. That's kind of where I began my entire journey. And so I would lead these groups of it was young men. That's how I found my path to men's work as well. But it's just this lucky, dumb kid out in the wilderness of Utah and Minnesota and Montana and all over the place. And I just like steeped in nature, right? I slept under the stars, slept on the earth, squatted on the fire, shit in holes for literally years, right? You got many hundreds of days or even maybe thousands of days out in that environment. And, you know, looking back on it, it might somewhat just have been the youth and the vibrance, but man, it was like I was fucking Superman, right? The way I felt and how healthy and all this stuff. And then I wanted a different challenge. So I moved to New York City. I became a New York City teaching fellow. I was getting my master's. I was teaching in the Bronx. And like that lifestyle shift from being in the mountains all the time to that, I mean, it fucking killed me. It destroyed me. And in that destruction, I wandered. I got invited to a handful of things. My first men's group, my first therapist, working with plant medicine, and my first meditation ever. And so the meditation that I got invited to was, so there's a school called Dharma Ocean. Dr. Reggie Ray is the teacher. He's been my teacher for a long time. Anyway, so I walk up a 4th story walk up in Manhattan. They instruct us to lay down on yoga mats and then like relax our body and then basically feel down with our senses into the earth underneath of us. And I fucking lost it. I cried many tears, and it was this insane recollection and remembrance that what was happening in my body at that time is what I lived and what I felt out in the wilderness on a regular basis, right? When I was doing that work, when I felt connected, when I felt grounded, when I felt alive. And so it was this huge, I mean, I'm getting the chills even telling the story now. It was this huge aha. It's like, oh, okay, you're telling me that I can embody that state of being without hiking 20 miles off of the nearest road. I could do that here just by orienting my attention down. And it was just this, right? Just like, and so bringing that seeming paradox together of somatic meditation with primal living connected to the outdoors and even hunting, it's actually one and the same, right? Like, I mean, you can overlay different parts that are of at different extremes, but it's actually an illusion, because sitting in a blind, tracking an animal, the ability to have your body's intelligence be plugged into the natural landscape around you is, I mean, I have been working on, I don't have it prepared, but I have been working on a meditation for hunters course, right? Because it literally is practical skills that make you better at that task.
So good. It's so funny. Like, as you're telling this and unpacking it, I'm thinking, I presented this as almost opposite ends of a spectrum, but as I'm looking at it, I'm like, wait a minute, this is exactly the same thing. I imagine the greatest hunters are the ones that are most in tune with their bodies.
It's true, man. I mean, so yeah, on that whole ride when I was making MeatEater, right? I flew all around the world, got dropped into hunts everywhere with all kinds of people. I mean, there's a couple examples. There was one dude named, oh man, what was his name? I forget his name right now, but he's a really well-known guide in the Southwest United States. And we would go on turkey hunts and different hunts. And the level of stillness that dude could sit for way longer than I'd ever seen anybody, even on meditation retreats, like hours, stone still, just like completely vanish, right? Just incredible. That's one example. The more sort of even bigger example is having the opportunity to hunt and track with indigenous hunters in Bolivia and in Guyana. And like, I mean, hunting alongside those dudes, I got to do this nighttime, a full night hunt with 2 dudes deep in the jungle of Bolivia. We were filming it, of course. And I mean, it's literally mind blowing, because it couldn't be more obvious that their reality is, I don't even know how to describe how different it is, right, from our Westerns, but their ability to feel and smell and hear and sense and be a part of and be impacted, like we sit up on this ridge with the moon coming in and all the jungle noises, and they're obviously basically having like a deep conversation with the wilderness around them. And I'm just sitting there being like, whoa, this is fucking weird. It's like, it's really wild. So their ability to touch into their body and the way that they process that information, I think like the type of somatic meditation I practice and teach and guide is just an approximation or, attempting to head in that direction, I would say.
How has your work with somatic meditation, all of your experiences with hunting, helped you be a better dad? What translates?
Well, I mean, I'd say the fundamentals translate. You know, the what does everybody tell you, right? So how much of communication is verbal and how much of it is nonverbal? Like most of it is nonverbal. And I think the levels of subtlety in nonverbal communication go far deeper than I think most people imagine, right? And so, you know, in any name any moment during pregnancy, during the birth process itself, during postpartum, tracking mom's needs, tracking physiological needs of our kids, tracking mood, tracking all of the things, the level of awareness that we can pick up on if we're really grounded, if we're really plugged in, if we're slowed down, if we're not racing, you know, ahead in our thoughts or elsewhere, our ability to be present is wildly buffeted by our ability to be in our body and to experience and hear it, right? And it's not, again, it's whole body hearing. It's a different way of hearing, but I think this stuff is well, I know this stuff is under the surface for everyone, and we can build our skill sets in these things pretty simply and directly.
Man, I love this. I love this thought of like becoming a tracker in your home. You know, like I picture the tracker out there and, you know, really paying attention to every element of what you're seeing and feeling all around you to be able to ultimately get what you're after. And as a father, if you have a desire in your home, maybe to be more present, then you have to be dialed into all the clues. You have to be reading the body language of every person in your home, and you have to be aware of your body language and how you move and how that interacts with the wild environment of your home. I'm gonna walk into the kitchen like I'm hunting later, you know. This idea is fascinating to me. Whole body hearing. I don't even know if I've ever heard somebody say those words. Whole body hearing.
Whole body listening is more
whole body
common,
listening,
I think,
yeah,
a more phrase. But you know, I mean, one thing to name here is that, you know, I think sensitivity gets a bad rap, particularly with men and masculine culture, and there's a conflation of the word sensitivity with weakness or weepiness or all kinds of things. But that's really doing it a disservice, right? Because what sensitivity is just an increased capacity for awareness of detail and complexity and intelligence in a lot of way, right? And so, you know, developing one's somatic or sort of primal sensitivity to, I mean, another way that it's connected, right? The hunting and the nature with the children. I mean, like we are still nature here, guys, right? We are, like, our bodies are, yes, we have these minds, but so much of what is going on is the basics, is this basic physiological shit. And when we can really learn to tune into that, yeah, I mean, it doesn't fix everything. It's not a panacea, obviously, but it's just deeply helpful in communication and that level of communication that's just so much faster and somehow more impactful than our words. You know?
What does your daily practice look like to be developing whole body listening, to be in tune with your whole system? What do you do each day?
I mean, these days, lately, you know, I have been tracking and attempting to get back to a morning routine for a long time. My morning routine for a long time has been 5 o'clock wake up with an infant and, you know, making breakfast. And so there's a way to practice these things in the flow of everyday life, but I wouldn't suggest starting there per se, right? I do regular practice, usually 45-minute sessions of, right now I do a lot of sitting meditation. But I started, so if anybody's interested, Dharma Ocean, on the dharmaocean.org website, there's free basic practices, and there's all of these bodywork protocols. So practice called 10 points practice, or yin breathing, or earth descent. Basically what you lay down and you orient your awareness into your body, and you work to relax yourself more and more, and you get in touch with your surroundings. And then you use that basis. It actually, what I would want to say here is, like, starting with that type of relaxation practice, if one is a meditator or wants to be a meditator but never has been able to click into it, it makes meditation possible. It makes meditation far more far more possible than if you come at it from a busy mind place. So it's a wonderful sort of entry protocol to other mindfulness practice. So I do a lot of that, and I spend as much time outside as I possibly can. And then I also, other daily practices are, I really do my best that when I am with my kids, or when I am, whatever the thing is, whatever the task is, because there's a lot right now with 3 little kids, but it's to, be there, right? Really be there, to be there all the way, and to, set work to the side, to set the other things to the side, to be so organized with all of the other things. So that is actually part of the practice too, is just to have such strong organizational structures that I can afford to set things aside and have the discipline to do work when I'm at work. And when my kids are here, then I can actually, even if it's just 15 minutes, right? Or even if it's 1 hour. Actually, one practice, which is, I guess, formal in a sense, is we wrestle. My boys and I wrestle pretty much every night when I come home. And I feel like that's this sort of like perfect, fun, primal, physical, it's just such a reset. And for myself too, honestly, it's kind of like the best way to come home. I get to get all the work energy out and just like wrestle these 2 little animals. And then we end 20 minutes later, like, all right, we feel human again, so it's a mix, man. It's wild at this point, right? I don't have a whole lot of extra time for extremely formal practice these days. But
7, 5, and 1, right? Are your kids' ages? Yeah. You went camping a couple weeks ago. What was that like?
We got this campground on an island about an hour from here, and it's not fancy, but it's perfect. And actually, I'll start with after the camping trip. I think maybe one of the most proud moments in my whole life came at dinner a few nights afterwards, and my oldest son was like, "Dad, how long can you go camping for? Like, what's the longest that you can go camping for?" And I'm like, "Well, honestly, you could go as long as you wanted, right? There's no actual end to it if that's possible." I said, the longest I've ever been is 49 days, right? That's my longest camping trip. He's like, "Oh yeah." He's like, "I think we should go camping for a month." And I'm like, "You don't know how happy you just made me, little man. Like you have no idea the level of like fulfillment and like making my dreams." Like, I'm actually tearing up, right, saying this. Like, my dream came true in that moment, maybe more than, I don't know, than maybe more than any other fathering moment. Like, God, man, like if that comes true, if I can set a month aside of my life to go in the mountains with that dude or whoever the hell else comes with us, like that's it for me. That'll do. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. I hope you are. I look forward to a conversation down the road where you've experienced that.
Yeah.
That's really amazing. That's truly, for me, one of the biggest motivations in learning the art of business, how to scale processes, systems, because that doesn't come naturally to me. I'd rather just be in a conversation like this with you, having, I truly, like, that's the part that I love. Systems I've always had this aversion to. It felt like I was working too hard to make something happen versus just letting it happen in a way.
Yeah.
And so I resisted that. But the fact that I've been focused on it is allowing us to do this, big family summer adventure that we've got coming up. It's why I'm in Steamboat Springs right now, that I'm able to do these things because I did tackle those systems. I have a guy, a friend, an author. His name is Mike Michalowicz. I don't know if you know him. He writes for entrepreneurs, and he said this great thing to me on a podcast a couple months ago. He said, "John, don't take a vacation from your business. Give your business a vacation from you."
No,
and I used to think about when I would, right, that it was me finding a way to not do the work. I was like escaping the business. And the truth is, it's like the greatest gift for me not to be the hinge that everything relies on, because that's not, then the business doesn't live beyond me. Then the business doesn't, if something happens to me, it's a disservice to everybody in the business to have created something that's so dependent on me. I want to contribute. I want to do my part. I want to give 110% to the business and show up for the guys, but I just don't want it to be built around me or on top of me in some way.
That's a good vibe or a good perspective to look through a family lens too, right? I think that carries. both on the
Definitely.
business side, but also the family side too.
100%. When you're talking about camping with your family, I was thinking about this road trip I did a couple years ago, and I was like, oh, I'm going to show my kids how to be like solid under pressure. And when something happens, I'll be like, oh, here's how we handle that. But I just had this great vision. And then night one in the trailer, I'm like, this fucking trailer, I can't, bugs are biting me. I'm like losing my shit. I can't, I'm wondering, dude, as somebody who has spent time in nature and worked on himself with the somatic meditation, dude, what knocks you off your game? When do you feel most dysregulated currently?
I mean, a lot of times. I think the big ones would be, when, we're already talking about part of it, right? It's so it is the when I haven't developed systems and the mundane web of things are like have themselves wrapped around me, right? And when my to-do list is this long as opposed to this long, right? And when I feel out of control, right? When I feel out of control and sort of pushed around by like the necessities on me, right? If there's 1,000 strings on me, if they're all pulling at once, that throws me off my game. What I do to combat that or work with that is discipline. It is cutting. It is like, all right, I'm going to sit down and like handle this shit. And so that's one, just the general cacophony of noise, right? If there's 3 kids and music and my wife's trying to talk to me and all that, like that's like a momentary hard thing, right? When there's just too much information floating around at one time, right? That definitely throws me off. And then I would say, there's sort of these waves, and I've learned to navigate them really well. But there's period of times. Well, let me just back up. Traveling for work, and then the reintegration at home, and sort of like it's not just me. It throws off the whole system, right? And so that's something that we've been working to hone and get better at for a long time.
Dude, my wife went to Peru for 2 months, and I had the boys for 8 weeks. And then she came back and people were like, oh, it must be so nice to have your wife back. Isn't it awesome? And I'm like, the honest answer was like, this is like hard as fuck having her back. Dude, yeah. And the interesting thing, look, there's great things. I love her as a human. I really do. But like we had the systems dialed in. I was the boss. Yeah. I had things under control. Like, you know what I mean? And then talking to people, like I heard a lot of people comment about the military. My dad was in the Navy. My mom said, yeah, your dad would go away for 6 months and I would have a whole system and I'd have things working. And then he would come back in and it would, as much as I like loved having him there, he threw the system off. This integration period is fascinating to explore. It's not a great honeymoon of like, oh, I'm so happy you're home. Although there is a part of that.
Yeah, it's tough, man. I'm curious. Sorry, man.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what's your integration strategy? Because as a guy who goes out into the wilderness and then coming back home or reintegrating after that solitude, what does that look like?
Well, at one point, my wife mandated that I take a rest day between my trips and my programming and coming back through the house. And I can't say that we fully employed that or committed to that for a long time, but it did seem to help pretty substantially. It's tricky though, right? Because I miss my kids. I miss my home. I want to come, and I'm excited. I'm all lit up and I want to come back. My wife just went away for 2 weeks, and that was the first time that she's been away for a while. And it was the same thing, it was definitely the same thing. It was actually slightly comical, right? So when I'm gone and I come home, she has her laundry list of complaints and, this type of thing. And, but it was wild to see it exactly the same in the reverse, right? So it was actually helpful to know it's a role thing and not a personalized thing as much. But listen, the deeper sort of theme that we're talking about here about slowing down, being the somatic practices, those kind of things. If I can really stick to my game and come home and really just not need to share, not need to do anything, but really like observe, maybe track, maybe that's the right way, observe and track what's going on and be intentional about like kind of sliding back into a right place. I mean, little things, but like just being very helpful, even if I'm exhausted, right? So doing an extra round of clothes or doing the dishes, like whatever that is, like come back in swinging. So I would say maybe those two things are things that I try to do, which is, slow myself, integrate in a way that's actually helpful, and then just kind of come back in and aggressively be helpful. That seems to help a little bit. And sex, honestly, like actually coming back together and using some of that polarized energy in a fun way and not a shitty way, that also seems to be helpful.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Fatherhood Unlocked, this project for you. And what I'm interested in, maybe from a big umbrella over this whole project, would be, with all of your work over the years, your own experiences, what is the real pattern that we're seeing with men, particularly fathers, in the world today? If you said, look, John, there's lots of nuances, but the theme that I'm seeing, like the overarching problem, if we can define it as that, and the thing you're wanting to find a solution for, the thing you want to bring resources and tools for, what is that? What is it that you're trying to solve?
Yeah, the first layer would be a recognition of the truth of what the project entails, right? Of what it actually means and what it takes of you to be a dad in whatever situation that anyone is. And I don't think this comes as a out of left field or a surprise to anybody, but I mean, our societal structure today with our nuclear families, everybody living on their own island, for most dads, it's not a feasible project. It's not really workable, right? Like to be able to both take care of all of the logistics and have the financial things in place, and this sort of what is a new wave of needs and expectations from fathers, which is presence, which is emotional capacity, which is nurturing our children and being woven into the fabric of the home itself, which again, maybe that's not true for everybody, but that is the general tone. That is what I'm hearing, is there's now this, like, the job description just doubled or tripled. Some of these new elements of what the job entails is not something men have been trained in. It's not something they've been modeled to. It's not something. So let's call it, for lack of a better term, the soft skills part, right? The emotionality, the nurturing, all of these things. That has come on as something of a dominant necessity, right? And that's an immensely big project to get good at that. I think actually our kids are really helpful at bringing that to us, and we can go through that. But as we go through that, we can't ignore the other things too, right? And so there's just this huge, fully holistic, integrated sort of set of things that we need to both be and do, right? And so that's the first thing. It's just this sense of like, holy, this is huge, right? This is overwhelming. And so that's one layer, right? Just on the sort of the job role part. But then you have the next layer of the world itself right now, with all of the information and the technology and the needs, and let's just call it the unknowableness of what's coming. There does seem to be an existential anxiety happening in all of the parents and all the dads that I'm talking to right now. I was talking to a buddy yesterday, and I was like, I mean, if anybody knows farm country, I grew up in farm country in North Dakota, but when a storm is coming or when, some big natural disaster is occurring, like animals feel it before it, and they do things, right? They go to the corner of the field, or they run away, or they kind of can sense. I kind of feel we're in that collectively right now, or some version of that. Like we don't, like there's smoke all over the country and things are just hotter than shit, even if we don't want to believe they are. All of these things, I just feel like there's this deeper, subtle anxiety we're all living in, and I'm concerned. I don't know that I'm concerned on a planetary. I'm not trying to be dramatic here, but I also, just from a simple well-being level of parents and our kids, and how what do we need? Like a question I'm asking all the time is, what do we need to do here right now to keep things okay? And how do we plan for this unknowable future in a sense that might give our kids a fighting chance, you know? And again, I'm not trying to be doomsday here, but I think it's at a point now where if we're not thinking this through, I think we're missing something pretty important.
What do you think is coming, or not, or not coming?
Yeah,
like when we talk about planning for an unforeseeable future or an unknowable future, what types of things show up for you, and what are you doing about it?
Yeah, I think that I think there's going to be a lot of moving around. I think there's going to be a lot of lack of solidity. I do think that, you know, we chose to move to Maine because there's immense amounts of fresh water here. The forecasts for climate change are that this is be a pretty good place to hang out. There's local communities that are very food growing dominant, and again, so I find myself on the spectrum where, you know, I haven't gone full prepper, full off grid. We need to be able to survive on our own. I don't actually think that's going to happen, but I do feel like I don't know. That's actually part of the problem, John, is that like the way AI is going to transform things and the way that the climate goes, I don't know, right? I really, really don't know. But the consensus that a lot of intelligent people that I've talked to is that most likely, like, our kids are going to need a level of resilience that we probably aren't carrying right now. And so that is one thing that, again, I don't know that I know that, but I think it's worth working toward that, whatever the case may come in terms of what happens.
I know your kids are young. So with that in mind, how are you demonstrating resilience or cultivating resilience? How is that how is that showing up now or into the future in your family?
Yeah, so it starts with some of the mindfulness and connected practices, right? Being close to the body. We have a big garden. We raise chickens. You know, just being actively engaged in a part of our environment, right? That's part of it. I think the next layer of that is community oriented, right? I mean, I don't envision a future where our family is off in the fucking wilderness surviving, but it's having vibrant, meaningful, both, you know, deep relationships, but practical relationships. So like setting up, an ecosystem around us, you know, socially, financially, emotionally, physically, agriculturally, all of these things, to where there is something. Part of it does, to me, seem to be a contraction back to the place, right? To a more local. That's what makes sense to me. That's kind of intuitively makes sense to me, right? Like, let's be here. Let's make this good. Let's know these people, right? Let's invest and let's be here, and stop with all of this like giant, far-flung, widespread lifestyle.
Do you believe community is the greatest survival tool?
100%. 100%.
Yeah. I think I heard you say earlier, I wrote in my notes, that 3 commitments for raising your kids: honored for who they are, access to all their emotions, and prioritizing social connection. Is that still true for you?
Yeah, I think that not all the way. I think if I made that list now, that was, you know, the everyman chapter of my life was being a full speaker for the fact that, you know, men need to address their mental health by, you know, not repressing what they feel, right? So, but I went all the way into that, and that was my sort of like full spectrum thing. I think since that point, I've grown not out of that. Now I just include that, right? I would include those elements and probably layer on some more traditionally masculine elements as well.
You know, I want to honor you for saying that right now, because the idea of saying, yep, that's what I believed, there is truth in that for me now, and I've evolved as a person and believe something different today, is such a refreshing thing for people to say. In fact, I was talking with a buddy the other day about, I listened to Robert Kennedy on Rogan's podcast, and he was like, what did you like about that? And I said, I think I liked the point where there was like 2 moments, and I'm not quoting it directly, but one is he was like, you know, I don't really know what I'm talking about right here. I don't have any more to add to the conversation. And I'm like, how fucking refreshing is it to have somebody in that position go, yeah, I don't know. Like, I love that. And then the other part is like, hey, I'm okay with saying I believe something new now that I have new information. Like, also, how refreshing is that to have somebody just say, I'll believe something new if I have new information. Like, I always want to be curious. That's wonderful for people to be able to evolve their point of view over time.
So that's the type of thing that needs to be our new baseline. Honestly, like that needs to be a baseline, right? I mean, think of it in the context of fathering. You talk to like 1,000 dads or men my age, and what was one thing their fathers did that was just fucking not okay? It was the opposite of that, right? It was pretending to know. It was pretending to have to get to be so tightly held onto something. But it's so easy to see through that, right? I do think that's something that's kind of what's possible these days is like, we don't need to fortify our identities by, pretending to be master of the universe. It's just like, come on, man. Like that's just not cutting it, right? If we're not evolving, if we don't have the level of humility and ability to stay, intact through that, I want to push people toward that, because otherwise we're obviously just fucking around, right? I mean, maybe a harsh way to say it, but that's what I feel.
Do you get involved politically? Do you share your voice in that field? Do you have strong feelings?
I haven't to date. Particularly in the time with Everyman, one of the things I was really proud of with that organization is that we brought in a lot of blue collar dudes, right? Like we were able to bring in not just your sort of left leaning, New York and LA and Austin dudes. We brought in people from all over the country, and there was a nice, like, I'm sure it skewed in one direction. It didn't skew conservative, but we made room, and I was proud of the progress we made on that front. So it was important to me, and in a lot of ways still is, or I don't know. I think it's changing here. It is changing for me, but in that time, it didn't feel appropriate. It felt I wanted to be able to be inclusive of the different viewpoints, and I still feel that way pretty fundamentally. I mean, listen, if you like actually take things seriously as a Buddhist for long enough, right? It's hard to jump on board anybody's fucking trip or anybody's train, right? It's hard to just be like, oh yeah, that's it.
That's the way, yeah.
Yeah, but I do think I'm in the very earliest stages of where I think maybe there is more of a voice to be had for myself in that. I'm not sure. I'm honestly kind of, it's been pretty recent, and it's been something I've been calling my closest buddies and folks lately, just to kind of talk it through, right? Yeah, I listen to the same podcast with Robert Kennedy on Joe Rogan, and I know Joe. I've hunted with Joe a handful of times, and I know him. Like, I'm not close to Joe, but I know him, and I trust him, right? I trust who he is as a person, and I don't know. I'm curious what's going to unfold in that arena, and I appreciate that question. I really do, because it's something I'm wrestling with right now.
Yeah, it's something I've stayed away from in the past a lot, because mostly feeling like I don't know. I don't have a lot to offer because I haven't studied this. I don't think I have developed thought. So I've been more curious. I've been asking questions. But lately, I feel like I'm developing a more, how would I say this? I am certain of a few things. And one is that I want leaders that are curious. I want leaders that will ask good questions. I want people that consider all sides of the story and are willing to evolve their opinion. Things like that, like what I want in our men's group.
Yeah,
that's who I want. I said from day one when we launched this thing, I want men with wisdom who are wise enough to know there's more to learn. The coolest thing I see in other men is guys that are like, oh yeah, I can make a fucking decision. You want to go left or right? Like, I'll pick. If we need to make a decision of like where to go, what to do, I will choose. I'll choose confidently. And I will still remain open to great insights and information. I'm not locked off to all of the feedback either, which I think is interesting because, to me, that is a part of like a theme of what we talked about today is how do you remain sensitive and like I feel and hear everything. I got all the sounds. I've got all this I'm sensitive to your emotions and to what this animal is doing, whether I'm hunting or I'm at home. I'm sensitive to all of it. And at the same time, I'm not overwhelmed by all of my senses being active. How do you not let all the things pulling at you? So it's an interesting place to explore. How do we remain sensitive and curious and yet not overwhelmed by all of these things to be able to then choose our path? Man.
I mean, I'm going to give a really stock answer here, but I actually believe it with my entire being, is that a level of contemplative practice or meditation like directly teaches us how to be with the cacophony and not be blown. And it takes time. This is not something I think that comes quickly, or this is like the practice of those types of things literally allow us to do that. But I want to give one more example here, because I think that, part of the ethos of the Fatherhood Unlocked podcast and what I'm doing is I'm excited by what's being asked of us as dads and as men right now, right? I'm so excited about the possibility of men who have the capacity to be aware, to listen, to be flexible, to be nurturing, and when the time comes, like, get the fuck after it, right? And so hunting is an incredible metaphor for this, right? A lot of it is sitting. A lot of it is horribly boring and uncomfortable, and your mind is loud and all this shit. And what you want to do is just sit and be and notice and pay attention and all of these things. And then something happens and it's like, wham, it's like go time, right? It's extending the full spectrum of our nervous system, right? It's this open sort of parasympathetic aware state, curious, all of the things. And then when it's go time, the sympathetic nervous system kicks in, and it's just like fucking action, no thought, bloodlust, and all of the things. And so just that ability to go back and forth through the different capacities that we innately have within us is like, fucking sign me up. I mean, and that's what I'm all about. Like, let's get good at all of it, because I actually think we have to at this point. I don't know the other, I don't know, maybe there's some other formations we can run here, but it seems to me we're being asked to step up in all of those ways.
Yeah, agree completely. For guys who want to learn more, connect with you, dig into your work, I know you've got the podcast, which I'm excited for our conversation. I hope guys go and check that out. You've also got other offerings for men. You've got some courses, perhaps live events. Talk to us a little bit about those types of environments where people can learn, and also what type of man might be you wanting to call into this.
Yeah. So in the fatherhood realm, I have an audio course. It's a private podcast audio course called Intentional Fathering, which is kind of just like a download of a lot of the somatic practices that I've been talking about. So I guide practices. I have challenges. There's and that's doing the privacy of your car, or truck, or earbuds, or wherever you are. I've just launched something called Father's Fire, which takes the best principles of small ongoing men's groups and is bringing that digitally to dads all over the place. We literally just launched last week, and so I have professionally trained men's group facilitators tied to every 6 dudes who join, and you kind of have your own. And I guess we didn't talk about that at all, but a huge part of my growth and background is the effective kind of beauty of dedicated men's groups that go on for time, right? And so I'm harnessing that specifically for fathers, and then we building a community of all these small groups as they go. So that's happening. It's not open to the public yet, but I think maybe we, as of today, maybe are taking waitlist folks. So that's happening. And then I have, on the outside, like you mentioned, rite of passage. I do cohorts of men to learn how to hunt in this mindful way. And I do a program called Force of Nature, which is a 3-day primitive camping trip on an island here in Maine. We might be doing one in the Pacific Northwest later this year as well. That's a 3-day men's retreat, sleeping under tarps, cooking over fires, and it's really a deep dive, kind of exhaustive men's group experience. And then, my other job is, I coach and consult for executives and corporations. Generally speaking, I do a lot of work with like the trickiest, gnarliest interpersonal issues within a leadership team, or like founding teams and things like that. That's kind of my specialty in that world. So,
yeah, it's good stuff, man. What are you hunting for? Oh, by the way, on these big trips for the
whitetail deer in Texas, and potentially pigs if I can get a good spot for that too. But mostly deer.
And are guys just going to the website, applying to attend one of those events?
Yeah, dandoty.com is my website, and everything I named there is on there. We're in the process of breaking it out. These sub brands are becoming their own sites.
And these are just for men, not like this is not bring your kid type stuff, correct? They're not set up that way.
Not right now. I mean, depending. So, a dude brought his 16-year-old son hunting last year. So it is realistic if a son is of an appropriate age, for sure.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier that Tucker, Hal, and I did a bison harvesting at Rome Ranch here outside of Austin, and man, that was incredible because we were like being educated about the animals and the land. And there was a comment made about like at any given moment, there's 1 million beating hearts on this land of all the animals. And I was like, this beautiful idea of this ecosystem and this respect and this love that they have. And, I get there's a lot of feelings around hunting. I get it. I understand. And if hunting occurs, this was the most intentional, conscious, process that I had ever seen. A great respect for the herd and the animals, and even the processing of that animal. The kids were there and they prayed over the animal, and it was just really a wonderful experience to do with our kids. And I again, I didn't grow up as a hunter, and I went through a period of life where I was like, even fishing, I felt terrible about fishing, and I was a vegetarian for a while, and ultimately where I have landed is that eating meat is healthy for me. And I've landed on the fact that if I'm going to eat meat, that I'm going to do it in the most intentional, conscious way possible. I'm going to know where the meat comes from. I'm going to be involved in the process as much as I can. And that felt really good to me. Yeah. Dan, just as we wrap up here, I really appreciate this conversation. Open-ended. Is there anything you want to say to the Front Row Dads community that we haven't yet gotten to? A call to action, anything that you want to share to wrap us up today?
Nothing that we haven't already touched in on, but just to sort of close that final thought about killing and about food and hunting and all that, I find that a lot of people have an image of what conscious hunting or even conscious living, means, and I think it's shown through a lens of, I don't know, doing it a certain way, doing it right, being overly apologetic, kind of like holding this idea of like, now we're good, we're doing it the right way, so we're good. But the truth is that it's not just that. That doesn't all of a sudden make it better. It's ugly. It's disgusting. It's violent. And I think that, it's true. I mean, you asked me earlier about, how do I keep it together? What triggers me too, right? And I think a lot of people and dads understandably like, well, I want to figure out how to never get triggered. It's like, good luck, man. I want to go hunting with making it feel good. Good luck. It's not going to happen. You're going to wound an animal. You're going to be sick for 2 weeks because you can't handle what you did. Like this, and so, I think there's a bigger lens to put on this that it doesn't excuse, it doesn't sort of make allowance for being sloppy or being cruel, anything like that. But it also doesn't try to paint a picture of if we just do it right, then things are okay. Because that breaks down. And I think that I don't know how to cap that off in any more pointed way, but I feel called to speak to that.
Oh, it's really good point. I'm glad you said it. It's very important to remember because sometimes I think that my goal is to not be triggered. Like I was telling you the story about being in the RV and, I'm going to show my kids how to not be triggered. And the truth was the lesson ultimately was here's how to get triggered, lose your shit, and then repair things and then apologize and own up. Like that was the lesson they got, not the perfect dad who didn't get triggered. Yeah. Which arguably could be more important, And I think
I would make that argument. Yeah, I would make that argument.
Yeah. Hey man, I really appreciate this conversation. I hope to continue these explorations with you, Dan, and follow along with what you've got going on. Excited about our conversation on your show, and then also really looking forward to figuring out if we can go hunting together at some point because that feels like the next logical step for me.
we should do that. Let's make it happen.
So guys can go find you if you point them to a website or two. Which one do you want to send them to?
Yeah, dandoty.com. And then you can get to the Rite of Passage hunting site and all the other ones, but dandoty.com.
Cool, man. Hey, brother, sending you and your family lots of love, and I hope you have an awesome summer for what's left of it, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, man. Be well.